Hi, thank you so much for finding a few minutes to listen in. I'm going to be briefly talking about how the benefits landscape has been changing over the last few years, what the impact of the pandemic has been on benefits, both from an employer and employee perspective, and then how captive can help support benefits. And I'll briefly be touching upon each of the individual benefit lines and what we see on the horizon for those coverages. At a 30,000-foot view, obviously there's been a lot of change in the way benefits have been perceived, both from an employer perspective as well as from an employee perspective through COVID and the recent pandemic. Employers who had benefits in their captive were far quicker to be able to adapt, to change their benefit plans, and potentially have savings to support their employees in their times of need. A lot of employers have started looking at benefits not from a siloed perspective of medical, life, disability, voluntary benefits and such, but instead looking at it across the board in a holistic manner, gravitating more towards the wellness concept rather than just do we have ample coverage on each of these individual lines. Adding these benefits to a captive can go a long way in facilitating that transition from a siloed line of coverage to a holistic wellness concept solution. I'll quickly touch upon each of the individual lines of benefits. Medical stop loss, I think, is the one line which has seen a lot of change and a lot of interest in the last few years. The reason for this is twofold. One, healthcare costs have been increasing at an extremely brisk pace. Employers are looking at alternate solutions to sort of bend the healthcare cost curve. Captives go a long way in helping employers do that. The second aspect is more from a third-party risk perspective. Medical stop loss for a long time was sort of perceived to be a first-party risk. Over the last few years, accounting firms and law firms have started to gravitate towards the concept that maybe medical stop loss is a third-party risk. Now, I will say each employer needs to evaluate that for themselves, right? So you need to evaluate it on the basis of your own individual circumstances and how your programs are set up. But the concept of medical stop loss potentially being third-party risk has gained a lot of traction in the market. Talking about life and disability, these lines have also seen a lot of change in the last few years. A lot of you might be familiar with the XPro process that was in place with the Department of Labor. Taking a quick step back, any ERISA coverage that is added to a captive needs to go through a Department of Labor exemption process. Life and disability are ERISA-based coverages and usually require Department of Labor approval. A few years ago, Department of Labor had this process called the XPro process, which allowed for employers to submit an application and get approval to add benefits to a captive. A year and a half or so ago, the Department of Labor said, we want to rethink this process and want to better understand how employers are using these benefit lines in a captive. They've gone through the process and have created a more streamlined way of doing so. And we have already started to see applications flow through the Department of Labor. So that's certainly something that's changing. As we look forward, I think there's going to be a lot more interest in adding life and disability to a captive. Again, these are third-party coverages and can help support a captive's position. From a disability standpoint, another trend that we're starting to see in the market, and I shouldn't say trend, starting to see a trend that has picked up a lot more steam in the market is the idea of self-funding employer-paid disability. This is an innovative way, usually does not require Department of Labor approval, but again, needs to be evaluated on an employer basis. Finally, I'll talk about voluntary benefits. These have been gaining some traction in recent times. Some of it goes back to my earlier comment about wellness initiatives, employers looking at benefits not just on a line-by-line basis, but across the board. Second, as healthcare costs have increased, voluntary benefits provide an opportunity to help employees pay for those increasing healthcare costs. Now, most voluntary benefits are underwritten at extremely low loss ratios, which means insurance companies are usually making substantial amount of dollars when you have a fully insured voluntary benefit. Adding them to a captive allows you to reduce the cost of those benefits for your employees.